20 years as a vet, I thought I'd seen everything. Then came Oscar, a normal tabby cat who knew exactly when someone would die. Every single prediction came true with terrifying precision. How did he know what even doctors couldn't predict? In my 20 years as a vet, I've seen it all. From simple everyday stuff to amazing miracles, from sad moments that break your heart to things that are just plain weird. I've helped puppies be born in the middle of the night. I've sewn up cuts and wounds that you wouldn't believe. And I've held the paws of beloved pets as they took their very last breath. Being a vet is like walking on a tightrope. You need to know science really well. You need to care deeply about animals, and sometimes you just have to make your best guess. But through everything I've done, I always trusted facts. I trusted the tests I could run. I trusted what I could see and touch and measure. That is, until one case came along, one small, quiet animal that knocked down every single thing I thought I knew about science. It all started with a phone call, just like most stories do. It was a Tuesday night. You know that quiet time when the animal hospital finally gets peaceful after a really long day? I was looking at some papers. The bright lights were making that soft humming sound they always do. The smell of medicine and animal fur filled the air like an old, familiar friend. Then the phone rang. The caller ID showed Steer House. That's our local nursing home where old people live when they need extra help. I'd worked with them before on their therapy animals. They had this calm golden dog and a couple of old birds, nothing strange or unusual. I picked up the phone thinking someone would ask me about dog food, or maybe one of the birds had a sore throat. But instead I heard Nurse Ellie's voice. Now, Ellie isn't the type of person who gets all worked up about nothing. She's the head nurse there. She's in her late 50s with no-nonsense eyes that have seen way too much. She's got this quiet way about her that makes everyone respect her right away. But tonight her voice sounded different. It was tight and unsure, almost like she was embarrassed about something. "Dr. Evans," she said, speaking so quietly I could barely hear her. "I'm sorry for calling so late, but we have a problem. It's about Oscar." "Oscar?" I tried to remember. Oh yeah, that scruffy tabby cat who mostly kept to himself at the nursing home. "Is he sick, Ellie? Is he eating okay?" I asked, already thinking about a regular checkup. Ellie let out a long, tired sigh. "No, Dr. Evans, he's perfectly fine. That's part of the problem. It's what he's doing." She stopped talking. I could almost hear her trying to figure out how to say something that she knew would sound completely crazy. "Dr. Evans," she went on, her voice getting even quieter. We think he knows when someone is going to die, and the people in charge here want me to ask you to come look at him, to see if something's wrong with him." I blinked. I actually blinked hard. My brain, which was trained to think logically about animal medicine, couldn't understand what she just said. A cat that could predict death? It sounded like something from a scary movie, not a call from a real medical place. I almost laughed. But Ellie sounded so serious that I stopped myself. She wasn't kidding around. She was really worried. "Ellie," I said, picking my words carefully, "are you saying this cat has some kind of magical power?" "I don't know what I'm saying, doctor," she answered, and I could hear desperation in her voice. "All I know is what we've seen, and it's happening too much to just be luck. Please, just come see for yourself. We're all pretty scared." I said yes. Part of me was curious, I'll admit that. The other part of me, the scientist part, was already thinking of reasons why this might be happening. Maybe the cat could smell certain things, or maybe he could feel changes in body temperature, or maybe there were tiny changes in the building that the people hadn't noticed. I was sure I'd find a perfectly logical reason for everything. I always did. This was just another mystery to solve. I had no idea then that this mystery would never get solved. It would become a big, gaping hole in everything I thought I knew about the world. This was the start of my most unexplained case as a vet. Steer House was a quiet place, even at night. The hallways that were usually busy with nurses and visitors during the day were now hushed and lit with soft, gentle lights. The air smelled faintly of cleaning products, old sheets, and something else. A subtle, almost sweet smell that I'd learned to connect with places where life was slowly ending. It wasn't a bad smell, just heavy. Nurse Ellie met me at the front door. Her face looked tired in a way that went way beyond just working a long day. She led me to a small, cozy room where Oscar was curled up in an armchair. He seemed to have no idea about all the quiet drama happening around him. He was a tabby cat with brown and gray stripes. He had smart green eyes that seemed to watch everything without really caring about any of it. He looked like any other house cat, maybe just a little more unfriendly than most. He definitely didn't look like someone who could predict death. "He's usually like this," Ellie whispered, pointing at the cat. "Keeps to himself. Doesn't like being picked up. But then he changes." I spent the next hour watching Oscar, trying to find anything weird about him. Anything that might explain what Ellie was talking about. I checked his heart rate, his reflexes, his fur. He was perfectly healthy. I even tried to get him to play with a toy, a little feathered stick, but he just watched it with bored indifference. He was, by all accounts, a perfectly normal, just somewhat unfriendly cat. "Ellie," I said, turning to her, "he's perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with him that would explain this." Ellie nodded, her jaw set in a grim line. "I know, doctor. That's why it's so scary. It's not about him being sick. It's about what he does." She then led me to her office, a small, messy space filled with charts and medical supplies. On her desk, though, was a separate handwritten book. It was carefully kept, with each entry dated and timed with short notes. This was her record of Oscar's predictions. "It started about 6 months ago," she explained, running her finger along a line in the book. "Mrs. Henderson, room 203. Oscar, who never went into her room before, jumped onto her bed and curled up beside her. He stayed there for 2 hours. We thought it was sweet. Then she passed away, 2 hours after he left." She flipped a page. "Then Mr. Davies, room 310. Oscar was with him for an hour. He died an hour later. It happened again and again. At first we dismissed it as just coincidence, but then it became a pattern. An undeniable, scary pattern." I looked through the entries, the dates, the times, the names. Each one was a life that had ended shortly after Oscar's visit. My scientific mind immediately started looking for reasons. Was it the temperature of the room? The patient's smell? Could it be a specific type of sickness that Oscar was somehow detecting? I suggested these ideas to Ellie, and she patiently, almost sadly, shot down each one. "We've tried to think of everything, doctor," she said, her voice flat. "We've moved him. He always finds his way back to the chosen patient. We've checked for changes in their vital signs, for specific medicines. Nothing. He just knows." I spent the next few weeks making surprise visits to Steerhouse. I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to catch Oscar in the act, to find the logical mistake that Ellie and her team had missed. I watched him from far away, observed his seemingly random walks through the building. He would ignore some rooms, glance into others, and then, with a tiny shift in the way he acted, he would make his choice. I remember one particular afternoon. Mrs. Albright, a sweet old woman with memory problems, was resting in her room. Her vital signs were stable. Her condition, while bad in the long run, showed no signs that she would get worse right away. I was in the hallway pretending to read a chart when Oscar came around the corner. He walked with purpose directly towards Mrs. Albright's room. He slipped inside, and a few moments later I saw him jump onto her bed and curl up against her side. He began to purr, a low rumbling sound that was almost never heard from this usually quiet cat. My heart started pounding. This was it, my chance to prove it was just coincidence. I waited and waited. 2 hours later, Oscar stretched, jumped off the bed, and walked out of the room. 30 minutes after that, Nurse Ellie came out, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Albright had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Just as Oscar had predicted, my scientific certainty began to crack. The evidence was piling up, undeniable and chilling. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else entirely, and it was starting to scare me. Not the cat, but what he represented. The unknown, the truly unexplainable. My first doubt had turned into a desperate need for answers. I talked to other vets, specialists in animal behavior, even a few human doctors who were willing to listen to my increasingly weird questions without laughing outright. I showed them the data, with the names removed of course, but carefully detailed. Everyone said the same thing, fascinating but without a clear biological reason. It was just stories, coincidence, seeing patterns where none really existed. But I had seen it. I had witnessed Oscar's scary accuracy. I began to spend more and more time at Steerhouse, often staying late into the night, watching. I tried to find any tiny clues. Was it a change in the patient's breathing, a specific smell given off by the body as it got close to its final moments? I even set up simple sensors in some rooms, trying to detect tiny changes in temperature, humidity, or even faint electrical signals. Nothing. Oscar would simply walk in, jump on the bed, and purr. A purr that to me began to sound less like comfort and more like a countdown. Nurse Ellie, meanwhile, had moved past doubt to a quiet, almost resigned acceptance. She no longer questioned Oscar's ability. She simply made it part of their routine. When Oscar chose a patient, the staff would quietly notify family members, giving them time to say their goodbyes. It was sad, perhaps, but it also brought a strange sense of peace to the families. A chance for closure that might otherwise have been missed. This practical use of the unexplainable only made me more uneasy. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was something with real-world, deeply emotional consequences. I remember one particularly difficult night. A new patient, Mr. Henderson, had been admitted. He was in his late 80s, weak, but his condition wasn't immediately serious. He was expected to last a few more days, maybe a week. I was at the nurse's desk looking at charts when Oscar, who had been asleep in the common room, suddenly woke up. He stretched. Then, with a purposeful pace, began walking down the hallway. My eyes and Ellie's followed him. He turned into Mr. Henderson's room. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was my chance. I rushed to the doorway, looking in. Oscar had already jumped onto the bed, settling beside Mr. Henderson, who was sleeping peacefully. I watched, my mind racing, trying to find any scientific explanation. Was Mr. Henderson's breathing more shallow? Was his skin cooler? I couldn't tell. Everything seemed normal, but Oscar was there, purring softly, his green eyes half closed. I stayed for what felt like forever, staring at the scene. Ellie joined me, her presence a silent acknowledgement of the grim watch. We stood there, two medical professionals helpless, watching a cat. After about an hour, Oscar stretched, hopped off the bed, and walked out of the room, giving us a dismissive glance as he passed. Ellie looked at me, her eyes filled with deep sadness. "It won't be long now, Doctor," she whispered. True to her word and Oscar's silent prediction, Mr. Henderson passed away peacefully in his sleep less than an hour later. The finality of it, the absolute precision, was like a punch to the gut. My scientific training screamed for an explanation, a reason, a cause and effect, but there was none. Just Oscar, a simple tabby cat acting as a silent, never-wrong messenger. The terror wasn't in the death itself, but in the chilling realization that there were forces at play, things in the natural world that defied every single principle I had ever learned. My carefully built world of logic and reason was crumbling one purr at a time. And the most terrifying part was that I was beginning to believe. The shock of Mrs. Albright's passing after Oscar's visit quickly turned into annoying mental torture. My mind, like a fortress built on hard evidence and logical thinking, was under attack. I found myself replaying every interaction, every observation, searching for the missing piece, the hidden cause. I became obsessed. My clinic hours, once my only focus, now felt like a distraction from the truly puzzling case of Oscar. I read everything I could find. I studied animal smell abilities, the incredible sensitivity of a dog's nose, the subtle chemical changes in a dying body. Could Oscar be detecting specific compounds released by cells that were dying? I researched something called death sense, a phenomenon sometimes reported in hospice care but never scientifically proven. I even considered the possibility of infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that humans can't hear but animals might be able to detect. Maybe the body's internal systems might produce such vibrations as they shut down. It was a long shot, a desperate reach, but I had to explore every possibility. I designed simple experiments, much to the amusement and sometimes concern of my coworkers. I tried introducing various smells into Oscar's environment, hoping to find one that copied the death smell I thought he was detecting. I used fake compounds, even samples from dead bodies obtained properly, of course, through a research contact. Oscar remained uninterested. He would sniff maybe, but never with the focused intensity he showed when approaching a patient on their deathbed. My sound detectors, put together from sensitive microphones and special software, found nothing but the normal hum of the nursing home. No unique low-frequency signatures came before a patient's passing. Each failed experiment chipped away at my scientific confidence, leaving behind a growing void of understanding. My conversations with Nurse Ellie became less about my theories and more about her observations. She had a quiet wisdom, a practical acceptance that I, in my scientific pride, initially lacked. She would tell me stories of Oscar's past visits, detailing the patient's condition before, the family's reactions, the peacefulness that often came with his presence. She spoke of how Oscar's presence had changed the atmosphere around death in the building. Families once terrified of the moment now found a strange comfort in Oscar's watch. He was a silent, furry angel, a gentle guide. This emotional aspect of his work was something my scientific tools couldn't measure, but it was undeniably real. I remember one particularly touching instance. A young woman, barely in her 30s, was dying from a rapidly worsening illness. Her family, a husband and 2 small children, were devastated. They held on to every moment, every breath. Her room was filled with the quiet sobs of loved ones. Oscar, who rarely entered rooms with such obvious emotional distress, walked in. He jumped onto her bed, not beside her, but on her chest, placing his paw gently on her hand. He purred a deep, strong rumble that seemed to fill the room. The family, initially startled, grew quiet. They watched, mesmerized, as Oscar stayed there for nearly an hour. When he finally left, the woman passed away within minutes. The family later told Ellie that Oscar's presence had brought them an unexpected sense of peace, a feeling that their loved one was not alone, that something sacred was happening. I witnessed their grief, but also their gratitude. It was a powerful, almost spiritual experience, one that further blurred the lines between the measurable and the mystical for me. My scientific mind struggled to reconcile the cold data with the profound emotional impact. This wasn't just a biological anomaly. It was something touching the very essence of human experience. And I, the veterinarian, was utterly unprepared to understand it. The more I tried to explain, the more unexplainable it became. The weight of Oscar's inexplicable ability began to press down on me. I was a veterinarian trained to heal, to ease suffering, to understand how life and disease work. Yet here I was, faced daily with something that defied every principle I held dear. It was like being a scientist watching an apple fall upwards consistently, repeatedly, without any force you could see. My professional identity, once so solid, began to feel like a house built on shifting sand. I found myself questioning everything. Was my entire understanding of the natural world wrong? Were there forces, energies, or forms of perception that science had simply not yet discovered, or perhaps could never discover? The thought was both exciting and terrifying. Exciting because it hinted at a universe far more complex and mysterious than I had ever imagined. Terrifying because it meant I was working with an incomplete map, a map that failed to account for the most profound and inevitable event in any life, its end. My conversations with Ellie became my only outlet. She, in her quiet, practical way, had already crossed the line of acceptance. She didn't need an explanation. She just needed to know how to best use this strange gift. She would share stories not with wonder, but with a kind of tired resignation. Oscar was with Mr. Peterson today, Doctor. He was talking about his garden. An hour later, he was gone. Or, Mrs. Davies' family was able to make it just in time, thanks to Oscar. They were so grateful. Her calm acceptance was so different from my internal struggle. I tried to rationalize it, to put it in a box. I told myself that Oscar was simply an extreme outlier, a statistical anomaly. But the sheer number of cases, the consistent accuracy made that explanation feel increasingly hollow. It wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern woven into the very fabric of the nursing home, a pattern that only Oscar seemed capable of seeing. One evening, I was watching Oscar from a distance. He was curled up in the common room, seemingly asleep. A new patient, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Finch, had just been admitted to a room down the hall. Mr. Finch was in a coma. His family had been told to expect the worst within days. I had just looked at his chart. His vital signs were indeed very low, but stable enough that he wasn't expected to pass for at least another 24 to 48 hours. I thought, this is it. This is where Oscar's streak ends. He'll go to Mr. Finch, and Mr. Finch will linger, proving it's just coincidence. My scientific mind desperately wanted that proof. Suddenly, Oscar stirred. He stretched a long, slow stretch, then hopped off the armchair. He didn't head towards Mr. Finch's room. Instead, he walked slowly, deliberately towards room 212. My brow wrinkled. Room 212 belonged to Mrs. Gable, a lively, seemingly healthy woman who was recovering from minor surgery. She was expected to be discharged in a few days. There was no sign, none whatsoever, that she was in any immediate danger. I exchanged a confused glance with Ellie, who had also been watching Oscar. Her eyes, usually so calm, now held a flicker of confusion. Oscar pushed open the door to room 212 with his head and slipped inside. Ellie and I rushed to the doorway, looking in. Oscar had jumped onto Mrs. Gable's bed and was now purring, rubbing his head against her hand. Mrs. Gable, startled but amused, stroked his fur. "Well, hello there, little one," she murmured, her voice clear and strong. "What brings you to my room?" My mind raced. This was it, the anomaly, the proof. I felt a surge of relief, quickly followed by a pang of guilt. I was hoping for a patient to not die, but also for Oscar to be wrong, to be normal. It was a twisted conflict. I stayed for a long time watching, waiting for Oscar to leave, for Mrs. Gable to continue her recovery. But Oscar didn't leave. He stayed purring, a silent, furry guard. After an hour, Mrs. Gable seemed to drift off to sleep, her breathing getting slightly more shallow. Still nothing alarming. I was about to suggest to Ellie that maybe Oscar was just enjoying the company when her pager went off. It was a code blue in room 212. Mrs. Gable had suffered a sudden massive stroke. She was gone within minutes. The relief I had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. Oscar had known. He had known. Even when all the medical charts, all the human intuition, all the scientific predictions said otherwise, he had chosen the path less obvious, the death that was truly unexpected. And in that moment, my last bits of scientific certainty crumbled into dust. The world was not as I understood it, and Oscar was the silent, purring proof. Oscar lived for several more years at Steerhouse, continuing his quiet, inexplicable work. He became a legend, not just among the staff, but among the families who came to say their final goodbyes. His presence, once a source of scientific confusion for me, evolved into a strange comfort for those facing the inevitable. I continued my visits less as a scientific investigator and more as a silent witness to something I had long since stopped trying to fully explain. My attempts to find a rational explanation never stopped entirely, but they became less frantic, more resigned. I read every paper I could find on animal intuition, on the senses of smell and hearing, on the subtle body changes that come before death. I even explored more mysterious theories, much to my own scientific embarrassment, looking into psychology and stories of animal psychics. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could fully account for Oscar's consistent, never-wrong accuracy. He wasn't just detecting a change, he was predicting a precise moment. He didn't go to every dying patient. He went to the ones who were hours, not days from passing, and he did it with a calm, almost detached certainty that was unnerving. He was never distressed, never anxious. He simply was. He was a silent, furry clock ticking down the final moments of a life. A gentle guide helping souls across an unseen threshold. The staff, once unnerved, now relied on him, not as a medical tool, but as a compassionate presence. When Oscar chose a patient, it was a signal, a quiet, respectful notification that it was time to gather, to say goodbye, to offer comfort. It was a macabre dance, perhaps, but one performed with profound dignity, led by a small tabby cat. Oscar eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep, not in a patient's room, but in his favorite armchair in the common room. The staff mourned him deeply. He had brought a strange comfort, a unique form of closure to countless families. For me, his passing didn't bring relief from the mystery, but rather a deeper, more profound sense of loss. The loss of a living enigma that had challenged the very foundations of my understanding. His absence left a void, a quiet space where the inexplicable once lived, a constant reminder of the limits of human knowledge. Years have passed since Oscar's time at Steerhouse. I still practice veterinary medicine, still rely on science, on tests, on what I can see and measure. My clinic is a place of logic and evidence where every illness has a cause and every treatment has a scientific basis. But every now and then, a case comes along that reminds me of Oscar, a pet that seems to know something its owner doesn't. An animal that reacts to an unseen presence, a shadow in a corner, a whisper in the air. And in those moments I feel a familiar chill. It's not fear, not exactly. It's the quiet, unsettling knowledge that there are layers to this world, to life and death, that my scientific instruments, my textbooks, and then my years of training can never hope to reach. It's the realization that the universe is far more mysterious, far more complex, and far more beautiful than our limited human senses can ever fully grasp. I've put hundreds of animals to sleep peacefully in my career, easing their pain, offering comfort in their final moments. I've witnessed the profound bond between humans and their animal companions, a bond that often goes beyond words and logic. But the one animal that truly keeps me up at night, the one that still haunts my thoughts, is the one that was perfectly healthy, the one that simply knew, Oscar. He wasn't a patient I cured or a diagnosis I solved. He was a living question mark, a silent testament to the vast unexplored territories of existence, and I'm haunted not by what he did, but by the one question I can never truly answer. How? His legacy is not one of fear, but of profound wonder. A constant whisper in the back of my mind that reminds me that sometimes the greatest truths are found, not in what we can explain, but in what we can only witness and humbly accept.